Hello and welcome. I'm Josh Schimmels, publisher and CEO of the Los Angeles Business Journal, and it's a privilege to be hosting today's cybersecurity and data protection roundtable discussion. As we know, cybersecurity is no longer just an IT concern. It is a top business priority. With threats evolving rapidly, organizations face a very complex landscape, which is shaped by things like AI, cloud adoption, remote work, geopolitical tensions, and then growing reliance on third-party vendors. The consequences of things such as breaches, they're significant, not only from an operational downtime standpoint, but also when we look at the financial, reputational, and regulatory risks involved. Today's conversation is going to explore many of these challenges. We're also going to take a look at strategies that businesses are using to protect themselves. We're going to discuss a lot of great topics today, such as emerging threats, practical defenses, employee training, which is so important today, vendor management, and the role of new technologies in staying ahead of the cyber criminals, which is so challenging today in today's moving world. We're joined by a panel of experts who bring diverse perspectives across cybersecurity, auditing, cloud infrastructure, and IT services. Before we dive in, I'd like to thank our partners for helping to make this discussion possible. We can't do these information sessions without you, so many thanks to Miller Kaplan, PM IT Services, Prager Metis, and Vega Next. Thank you all so much. Okay, we've got a lot of great content to get to. I'm excited, so let me go ahead and introduce our panel. We've got, first off, Pervez Delawala, founder and CEO with Vega Next. David Lamb, partner with Miller Kaplan. Ali Mirkarimi, CEO, PM IT Services. And Gurjeet Singh, Chief Information Officer with Prager Metis. Welcome, everybody. Let's get started with a general question to the group. Okay, as I mentioned, cybersecurity, it's now a top business issue for all CEOs, for the C-suites, for everybody in companies. It's not just about IT anymore. From your perspective, what's the biggest shift that you've seen in how organizations are maybe approaching their cybersecurity issues today? Pervez, let's start with you. What are your thoughts?
All right, thanks, Josh. So what we're seeing as the biggest evolving or what businesses are facing now is weaponization of AI. And so the attackers are not now able to create a hyper efficient, personalized campaigns against companies mimicking CEOs' writing style or their deepfake voice, mimicking their voice or CFO's voice, and then doing some, wire transfers, authorizing wire transfers, things of that nature. So that's one of the biggest risks that we do see for businesses, along with the AI supply chain, where we're fast to adopt, or some of the businesses are fast to adopt AI right now, and those models can be poisoned or stolen or manipulated, and there's not much attention given to those models. So those are my biggest concerns, and that's what keeps me up at night.
Yeah, I think those concerns are keeping a lot of people up at night, especially as we see the advancement of the use of AI in particular in fraud cases and things like mimicking other people. And I think I read somewhere it only takes 15 seconds or 15 words spoken out loud for AI to take your voice and then be able to recreate an entire conversation. David, what are your thoughts? Same question.
So I think, in this heightened awareness model, we've seen more emphasis on technology. We have not seen a big shift in business owning at the executive level the priority, Josh, that you referenced for information security. Information security is not purely an IT sport. Sure, we need endpoint protection. We need to be aware, our users need to be aware of what's going on. This is a business issue. Your resiliency, how you can respond in the event of an attack, your insurance, what are you going to do if someone steals everything in your bank account? Your basic hygiene, and I know we'll talk about this a little bit more, making sure that you're aware of the vulnerabilities, those patches that you get on your iPhone or your Android or your Windows or Mac system, that all of those things are being addressed. And that has to be managed at the executive leadership level. It can't be delegated, and it has to be a business priority, because for folks where it's not, we're seeing some dire consequences.
Yeah, I think that's important, and we're going to dive into so many of those topics as we get further along. I'm glad that you mentioned, things such as insurance. That is, it used to be a luxury to have a great cyber policy. Today, it's an absolute must for everybody, and you have to have not just a policy, a really strong, well thought out policy. Ali, same question. What are your thoughts?
Thanks, Josh. And you may hear me repeat some of the sentiments that Pervez and David have mentioned, but I want to hone in on something that we continuously have to really remind our clients and proponents, that technology is one part of the conversation, but really it's training the employees and building a security first culture, because they're your first line of defense. As good as the tools are, Pervez mentioned AI. Those AI models are so good that they can mimic your writing style. They can mimic how you interact with your staff. And if one of your staff gets something that's a little bit out of the norm, like this morning, I got a form from one of our clients to give them a credit reference. So I actually picked up the phone and called the client and said, is this something you want me to do? So just changing people's behavior is something that we see as a very, very important opportunity for businesses to consider.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. That's so important. Just in not only our company-wide training that we do quarterly, but in side once a month, I've got security meetings with my team, and we go over things. And you're right, just being able to recognize the tiniest things and pick up the phone before you do anything, even if it sounds pretty much, like something that might come from somebody on your team. AI is getting smarter, and it is mimicking how we speak, how we write, and how we communicate. I think that's a really excellent point. All right, rounding out the same question, Gurjeet, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, no, I think between Pervez, David, and Ali, they touched up on some good points. Broadly speaking, right, there definitely seems to be an emphasis on resilience and not just protection. I believe organizations are accepting that breaches will happen, and the thinking has shifted to, do we have the necessary tools, processes to detect, respond, and recover from such scenarios? And effectively, this is opening the door to implementing a strong compliance framework within the organization, such as a NIST, an ISO, or SOC 2. Think of it this way, you got to take the shift to position yourself from traditional prevention to building a strategy to minimize the impact and ensure that the operations can run during and after an incident.
I think Gurjeet, what you said is really important. Those compliance frameworks are what are going to compel you to do a full disaster recovery test, making sure that your systems can come back from nothing to what you have to do to operate. And this is a critical business function, because executive leadership has to make sure that you are testing those systems on some regular cadence, every 6 months, every year, so it's going to come back.
Totally agree. We talked about it internally. It's a checklist that you have to establish in terms of your controls, responses, and how do you sort of escape a situation or a crisis. And that all starts with the framework. If you don't have that in place, it's a problem. So
Well,
yeah.
and I think we'd all agree that, the response, the cybersecurity itself, needs to be evolving as fast as the threat actors are evolving their uses and their technologies and their new methods. We've got so many different converging risks today that, if you look at the attack surface, it really is wider than ever. Pervez, I'm going to stay with you for a second here. Let me ask you your thoughts on, I'm talking about emerging threats, and, here we are, it's fourth quarter. We're starting to look at the new year. All companies are starting to figure out their business plans, their budgets. What are new threats and things that our business community needs to be concerned about and thinking about and really preparing for now as they're looking at next year?
Sure. We go through a list of different aspects of the business, but what every business should be concerned about from now on until the cows come home is, number one, AI-powered cyber attacks. This is not just a hype; it's a fundamental shift that every business needs to adapt to for existing threats and the creating new ones or have been created, and we need to defense against that or create defenses against that. Supply chain and third-party attacks. Attacking a single vendor can now compromise hundreds or thousands of their clients and customers. So that's another big shift that we're seeing in last, I would say, 3 to 4 years. Advanced phishing as a service or ransomware as a service. This has become now a professionalized service where you can get sophisticated attacks created with bad actors and then cut them into profits that you end up generating through these type of attacks. Weaponization of legit tools like PowerShell, RMM software that can create massive issues for clients. From a geopolitical side, critical infrastructure targeting, that we've seen it for a few years now. We tend to, or we're projecting that that's going to increase as geopolitical tension rises. And then just overall lack of, as my other panelists mentioned, lack of training for employees, and that becomes a key factor. You could put all the defenses all over your infrastructure, but if you don't train your employees, then that's your weakest link.
Yeah, and you never know sometimes where that weakest link is going to come from. We've got attacks coming through third parties. We've got, software as a service, SaaS tools that it's coming in through. And to your point, also supply chain partners, people you do business with that you don't know what their security protocol is and how it interacts with yours. So on that note, David, let me ask you this. When we think about our vendors and our supply chain partners, people that help us run our businesses outside of our office, our external partners, how should businesses be rethinking that vendor risk as they look at how to manage that in 2026?
I mean, this is one of the most essential vulnerabilities that businesses have. They've trusted perhaps their IT provider or provider of software for many, many years. And, you've got to have some risk prioritization in your third-party risk management program. And going back to the frameworks we were talking about, you got to make sure that these providers have security practices that are at least as good as yours, if not better. And we're very concerned that folks will come in through these avenues. So for us, we're looking for generally some sort of external audit based upon a framework like AICPA SOC 2, Type 2, or an ISO 27001 audit that someone can give you that says, we're doing the right things with regard to security. On top of that, you've got to have contractual clauses that protect you so that you will be notified if there's an incident and that the organization contractually agrees to keep this level up. And finally, you've got to be reviewing these vendors on an annual basis. You need to make sure that they're staying up to speed on all of these evolving threats that we've already talked about.
David, real quick before we move on, are you finding that those audits are more readily available today upon
Yeah,
request?
we are finding that they are more readily available, and our own clients are going through those audits, and in order to show, hey, I've got all these practices in place. So we are seeing a really nice evolution of more organizations having those bona fides.
That's good to hear. We see big news headlines almost every week now, giant corporations that get hit with some type of attack, whether it's ransomware or it's just data breaches. And I think a lot of businesses that in particular are small to mid-size, they see these headlines and I don't think they feel they're as vulnerable, because who's going to want to come attack a small business or a mid-sized business? Yet they're also the most lowest hanging fruit in some cases because maybe they don't have the resources, maybe they're not paying as much attention. So there might be a misperception about we're too small to be targeted. Ali, small and mid-sized businesses, realistically, what can they do to close that gap, to not be the lowest hanging fruit, to strengthen their cybersecurity posture, when they've probably got more limited in budgets and constraints than larger businesses?
Josh, when we talk about cybersecurity for small and mid-sized businesses, the good news is you don't need an enterprise level budget to build strong defenses. It's really about focusing on the fundamentals. So you've heard it again, and I'm going to say it. Focus with the human firewall. Most breaches happen because of human error. So invest in some affordable training and phishing simulations. They go a long way.
Yeah.
Make cybersecurity part of your culture. The next step is authentication. Use password managers, enforce multi-factor authentication, especially for critical systems like your email, finance, and HR. Again, these are low-cost steps that can make a huge difference. Then the next step is keep everything patched and updated. Automated updates and inexpensive patch management tools can really close those vulnerabilities before attackers can even exploit them. And BCDR, backups, are the other cornerstone. And easy thing to remember, the 3-2-1 rule. 3 copies of your data, 2 different media types, and make sure one is offsite or offline. And don't just back up and forget about it. Test
Right.
your restore process regularly.
Well, 3-2-1, that's a good takeaway. As our listeners are out there, there's a lot of great information. 3-2-1, that's great. And you're right, MFAs are becoming more commonly used in multiple places. It's not just when you log into an email server. It's being used, quite a few places, which I think it's such an easy step to take. And now a lot of insurance policies, they will actually be voided out if you don't have the right MFAs in place. We're seeing that more common.
I want to add 2 points that I think are really important. In addition to the 3-2-1 rule, you want to make sure that your backups are what are called immutable. They cannot be changed because ransomware will not just delete and encrypt your data. It will go after your backups. And those backups are typically in the cloud and online. So you need to make sure that's in place. Number 2, I think it's so important to make sure your IT team is educated on these technologies. And if you have an outside IT provider, that they are expert in the security implementation of the technology, that they have a security package, that they know how to service you well. And it's not something that we offer at Miller Kaplan. I'm saying it just to make sure that just because you've done business with someone for 20 or 30 years does not mean that they've got the expertise you need.
Yeah, I agree. And let's stay on the cloud for another minute here, because we're seeing, this is not a new trend, but it's also it's going to continue. And I think that we've seen the cloud is here to stay. The way that infrastructure and the way we do business, the way we work in the cloud, secure backups in the cloud. Gurjeet, how has this shift and this increase movement to the cloud change the way businesses should be securing their data today and then tomorrow?
Yeah, so pre-COVID, I think we can all agree that the security model was largely based on a network location, right? Everyone was expected to be in the office. At least as an accounting organization, I can tell you across 25 offices, we had full-time team members entering the office every single day, as there was very little desire or an option to work remotely. So traditionally, network and engineering teams, they focus their attentions on building these high castles, right? With firewalls, VPNs, network access controls, and all the time and money was spent defending these gates. So the fundamental principle was that once you were inside these gates in the network, you were largely trusted. Fast forward COVID, and with cloud adoption, right now you have this ecosystem of distributed workforces, right? So it completely destroyed the old legacy model, and the assets now, which is our data, our applications, our users, they're no longer contained within that physical corporate network. They're everywhere, right? So instead of trusting the location, regardless of where the connections are coming from, now you have to verify the user, the device, and the application every single time access is requested. This is why now the zero trust architecture, and when you pair it with MFA and least privilege access controls, this has become the new foundation of the perimeter. Right, the boundary is no longer the network edge; it's the identity of the user and the health of their device. And just to add a little bit on the shift, I would say that there's a little bit of confusion when it comes to the cloud model, right? You have to think of it as a shared responsibility model where just because you subscribe to Azure or AWS, it doesn't mean you're going to get all the security out of the box. There's some tools available, but someone with knowledge has to go in and configure the different access controls and the perimeter controls. So, when you look at the major breaches over the last few years, almost all of them trace back to a customer misconfiguration, a bucket left open or an insecure identity policy without any kind of real-time monitoring. So it's important to remember that while these tools are available out of the box, they still need to be configured properly and by a dedicated IT professional.
Yeah, and I think we'll talk a little bit next about how to avoid making some mistakes that in some cases are preventable ahead of time. We've looked at how organizations can identify the risks, whether it's internal or external or partners coming in from software. And we've also talked about the concept of security as part of a culture. David, let me ask you this. When it comes to cybersecurity, I've shared mistakes they can happen. They can be very costly, but sometimes they're also avoidable. From your perspective, and as you're talking to your clients, what are a few common missteps that you see clients make, and then how can you correct them maybe before they happen then?
So, building on the discussion we've been having on cloud, the first thing is you've got to have a framework that sets the bar. You've got to have a written information security plan that tells you what you need to do, because there's a lot going on here. And yeah, absolutely. You have to, if you're putting your business in Amazon or Azure or Google Cloud, you've got to configure those solutions properly, or you're just putting your data out there for the taking. The biggest mistake we see over and over again is vulnerability management. Folks are not patching their systems. They think they're being patched, but if you're not scanning your systems with one of the top 3 vulnerability scanners, you're going to not know when those patches are missed or if your machine is misconfigured. And it is absolutely essential to have somebody running those vulnerability scanners to tell you what's going on. And the biggest thing is this has to be an executive managed issue. It cannot be delegated to IT. It has to be business saying it is a priority for us to do our education. We've heard about that over and over again. It's got to be a priority to manage our resilience, that our backups are working and can be restored. And it has to be a priority to manage the overall program. You can't say, hey, I'm not going to do it for the next 3 months because I want to focus on sales, because that's when you get attacked and that's when you run into a problem.
Well, they say there's two types of businesses who've been hacked and attacked and have had vulnerabilities, and businesses who will be. So that being the case, and we know that this is a realistic part of business. It's not just about what you do to prevent it. Sometimes you can't, or you through the best efforts of your IT and your training and your people, things still happen. As we know, breaches happen. So I guess, the next question from a business standpoint is, what can we do to structure an incident response plan ahead of time? Because how you respond, the manner you respond, the steps you take, the speed at which you take them, all make such a difference in this point when this happens. Ali, what does an effective framework look like for today's threats as you're putting together an incident response plan?
I just want to just highlight something. David mentioned something really important in his answer. It has to come from the top down. So it's an executive-led issue. And this incident response plan isn't optional anymore. It's critical for all businesses. And it's, you want to minimize damage and recover as quickly as possible. So typical incident response plans have 6 components: preparation, detection, containment, eradication, recovery, and lesson learned. The first 5 are, everyone expects: to be prepared, detect something happen, contain it immediately, don't let it spread, remove it from your environment, recover. That comes from your, regular testing that you can restore and stuff. But again, lessons learned is a lot of people do the first 5 steps, and then the last step where you look at your plan, you see if you have to update it, and what is it that you learned, and how can you take what you learned and implement it to make your environment safer. And a lot of people, as David said, they're onto sales or they're onto operations or something, and they don't spend enough time in looking at what happened, sitting down, and looking at identifying any weaknesses. So the plan needs to be updated and tested regularly. And we believe when you have a well-defined and practiced plan, then it doesn't become a reaction. It's something that you respond strategically. And hopefully less impact, faster recovery.
Yeah, that's great. And I think we'd all agree that plans also need to be practiced. So let's stay on that. Gurjeet, how can you realistically test your response readiness? Are there exercises that you recommend for your clients? I think you're still on mute, Gurjeet.
Sorry about that. Yes, to test the response readiness, I think you need to think about, your plan internally, number one. And it starts with first documenting, your critical assets within the organization. Where are the applications that host the most critical data? In addition to that, you have to think about a readiness exercise that begins with an incident response plan, as well as a tabletop exercise if you want to combine the two, with a goal in mind, right? You have to think about it as it should be a guided discussion that creates a hypothetical crisis scenario. For example, if your firm is hit with a ransomware attack, what's the next step? Does anyone have written communications? Have you simulated what the instructions are going to be to the executives, to the IT team, to the security team? If you don't have this game plan documented, you're going to be in for a crisis beyond just reputational damages, potentially complete business downtime and business loss. So effectively, I think it starts with getting a documentation established of all your critical assets, and then formulating a plan which consists of executives, leadership, members of your IT team, your security team, and the finance team to the legal teams. Once you have all this on paper, then the goal is to start practice decision making, right? Practice the instructions in terms of whose responsibility it is to identify gaps in the escalation paths, and also test coordination between the different teams and the stakeholders within the organization. So effectively, it really comes down to again, documentation, identification, and then exercising that in a simulated environment.
Well, and I want to go back earlier in the conversation. We talked about our teams and our cultures and training. There's formal programs out there that you can use, like Know Before, and there's internal cultural things you can do, and meetings and discussions. But there's probably more. What does a meaningful training, program and regiment in a company actually look like today? Pervez, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so training is a key element. We emphasize that to any clients that we engage with. These are not if it's a training is just a traditional training program, so check the box exercise, they're not going to be effective. You got to make it more engaging. It can't be annual based, laborious or boring lectures. It needs to be micro learning, delivering 3 to 5 minute type of a training once a month or once a quarter at minimum. So this way you can keep the employees engaged and be aware of the new attacks that are formulating around them. Make it engaging, make it gamify it, and introduce points, leaderboards, badges. That usually creates a culture that they want to be better than other employees within the company. Simulate a sophisticated phishing campaigns, which then trains them what to look for, because again, them being the first line of defense. Foster, see something, say something culture, so they can identify and they become a part of the solution and not the problem. Role-based, department-based training. Some departments have a lot more sensitive data than some other departments, so you need to train them differently. And then leadership. It all starts with them. If they are not bought into it, the rest of the company will not be bought into it either. So that's where it all starts. So that's what we focus on the most.
Thank you so much. That's David. Did you have something to add?
I want to add just three things from Pervez's excellent points. Number one, you want those phishing attacks to happen when you're busy, right? And that means, you're going to have it in your busy times at holidays, because that's when your guard is down. But number two, management has to hold people accountable. If they're clicking through and you're having incidents or clicking into phishing attacks, you can't just let it go, because then it's a nothing. And in order to do that, to get those folks who aren't catching those attacks, you really have to have individual conversations with them so they understand the gravity of what's going on, because they can put you out of business.
Yeah, that's a really, really good point. Thank you for adding that, David. All right, so we've got a few more questions. I want to make sure that we get to all of them. So we're going to narrow our responses down just a little bit. Another thing that you hear is technology is advancing at a rapid pace all the time, right? But I would argue technology is only as useful as our ability to use it, understand it, and implement it. So, Gurjeet, as we see new advancements in technologies, how do we adopt them faster, and what approaches do you believe are going to be the most important to improving cybersecurity over the next year, 2, 3 years moving forward?
Yeah, so there's an interesting number of new technologies that really focus on detection and response. Every vendor in the ecosystem, they're doing their best effort to introduce AI in some shape or form to their existing platforms. But what excites me the most is really in anything in the marketplace of defensive AI and behavioral analytics. Let me touch upon that just a little bit. So, we hear the hype on AI. We understand that it is here to stay, at least in the short term, if not the long term. AI systems and solutions that are more defensive minded, they can quickly learn what is normal activity within the network and what is generally good user behavior. So, for example, how quickly someone types versus a bot speeding through a large number of commands, right? Or even login times. Like, why is someone suddenly logging in at 3 a.m. in the morning when the work hours are 9 to 5, right? You're not going to have someone sitting behind the desk looking through all these logs. If you have a systematical way of, again, even through the relationship you have with your MSP or your SSP, these are technologies that can certainly accelerate and confirm if something is compromised or account compromised along the way. I think to me that really speaks a benefit, but also an advantage when it comes to some of these newer solutions in the marketplace. So, like Pervez said earlier, and I think Ali also hinted on this, attackers are using AI, right, to craft more convincing emails. In the same lane, you have to have defensive teams use similar solutions to counter these attacks, and even leverage machine learning to, kind of put a solution in place as a broader sense.
And I think that's a really good point. Professor, I'm going to ask you to kind of hop into this with a short response. AI is both a tool and a threat. Okay. How do we strike the balance for using AI to both be a defense, but without creating new vulnerabilities at the same time?
We try to implement or focus on three elements: shift defensive training, move from annual phishing tests, as I mentioned earlier, to continuous human hardening against deepfakes and advanced social engineering. Second is formalized third-party risk, especially coming from vendors. Map your critical vendor list and insist on more evidence of their security posture, their security controls. And then your own AI, meaning the business's own AI initiatives. Apply a dedicated security framework around the AI projects that the businesses are implementing. So those are your three main focus points that we communicate to any clients that are engaged with us.
Excellent. And we've talked about partnerships, and we've touched about it in a couple of different ways. And David shared a little bit about how to get your vendors and your partners, your third-party vendors, to provide a little bit more on what they're doing and what their standards are. Ali, I guess I'm going to ask you to share your thoughts on that. How can businesses, aside from what we've already heard, ensure that third-party vendors and partners are truly aligning with your company's standards on cybersecurity? Are there other thoughts that you have?
Yeah, Josh. So, of course, David mentioned initial due diligence and embedding cybersecurity into the relationship. So it's an ongoing collaboration. So that means either mandating your vendors to provide regular reporting or allowing them for you to deploy tools that can gather this, because this due diligence shouldn't happen just at the beginning or on a yearly basis. It needs to be a continuous process where your procurement chain or vendors are continually reporting to you, so you have visibility that they are patched, they are protected, and also report on any potential security breaches that happen, so that you can work together to ensure that it's not only your environment that's safe, but your vendor and people deeper into the procurement chain.
Thank you so much. Well, we've covered a lot of topics, and we're down to our last two questions. One thing we haven't spent a lot of time on is sort of the financial implications, right? I mean, I think we all intuitively understand that business interruption is a cost, and there's other real costs involved with things like cyber attacks, but they can have significant financial implications for a company in ways that maybe executives aren't even thinking about ahead of time. David, as you're out talking to your clients and you're advising them, maybe what are some of the biggest financial risks that come from cyber attacks, beyond those actual physical breach costs? What do we see, and how do you advise your clients ahead of time to try to prevent them?
So number one, funds stolen from banks. Again, I love what Pervez said about continuous human hardening. That's a great way to look at it. If you have funds stolen from you, the FBI can claw those back in many cases within the first couple of days. Get to your cybersecurity professional immediately. This is not a wait thing. Lost business. The average ransomware downtime is 19 days, even if you have backups. Have that plan, make your exercise, and harden your humans. And finally, just be aware that you've got to give notices. There's privacy laws. There's 50 different state breach laws. And just be aware that there could be fines. So the more you can do on the preventative side, the better you are.
Yeah, and when these things happen, there's so many experts out there that you're going to want to know before they happen, so that those first calls, they're to it's not just the IT response team and the recovery. You might want to call, your management consultants, your IT, but you also want to know who your cyber attorneys are ahead of time, so that you can understand what are those liabilities, what are you required to do, what type of communication with your clients and your vendors are you required to do, what does the due diligence process look like for your company. These are all really important things to talk about ahead of time in I think in your response plans. So that's great. Well, this has been a really great discussion. We're down to our final question. I'm going to put it out to the group, and this is really geared toward if I'm one of our listeners, I'm watching this, I've learned a lot, but I'm still, it's a lot to take on. All right. What is one piece of advice that you can give to those watching and listening today who are running businesses? They're in the C-suite. If you could give one, maybe two pieces of advice, most important things they can do in the next 12 months to stay ahead of cyber threats, what would it be? Gurjeet, let's start with you.
Sure. So I always tout education. I think we said that the weakest link in the security chain is the human element, right? So cybersecurity training shouldn't just be an annual exercise. It should be done, at least in my opinion, quarterly. And I'm not saying have your users commit to an hour session every quarter. Run a smaller program with the latest trends, if you will. You don't want to wait another year to introduce the emerging risks within the industry or within cybersecurity in general. You want to have your users at least be aware of some of these emerging attacks or situations. Equally important, I would say, social engineering, right? It's understand your business and craft emails that really relate to the user experience. This way, they're more tempted to click on the content as opposed to just seeing something that's more foreign and outright ignoring it. Right. So if you're using SharePoint, send a templated, convincing email which has a SharePoint characteristics. The other thing, the final thing I would say is, on the education side, don't be afraid to consider a change. Right. Demo products that are direct competitors in the marketplace. They may offer a competitive advantage over your existing tools and allow you to diversify the layers of security that you have within your organization.
Excellent. Thank you. Ali, same question.
We've spent a lot of time on human hardening as Pervez coined that term or used that term. So you still have to make sure you have the right tools. And what does that mean? Whether you're using an outside firm or an internal firm, challenge them, ask them to bring newer tools or different tools that can provide different type of services. Ask those questions. Just because you've used the same MDR, EDR platform doesn't mean that it's set up to protect you or provide the benefits in this ever-changing threat landscape. So yes, it has to be a balanced approach. On one side, you need training, you need your employees, you need your human capital to be trained and be able to recognize, but on the other side, you need to have modern tools and proper tools in your environment.
Excellent guidance there. Balanced approach. David.
I think very simply, get a vulnerability scan that's going to say if your patching is working and if you've got some misconfigurations on your system. Prioritize those items and go down that list in priority order.
Wonderful. And finally, Pervez, take us home. One piece of
Sure.
advice.
So from a human factor side, train, test, and adapt. When it comes to your infrastructure, install, test, and adapt. And on an infrastructure side, what David had mentioned, like making sure you have the proper backups or you're patching on a regular basis. A lot of times what we see, people do have backups, but they've never tested how long it will take to recover that backup. That is, if you have 10 terabytes sitting in the cloud, well, do you ever test it? How long will that take to bring those 10 terabytes back to your server if that's how you were configured in the first place? So those are main points that we drive home.
Thank you so much. Pervez, David, Ali, Gurjeet, it's been really enlightening. I really appreciate you taking the time to be here, to sharing your insights, your expertise. I encourage all of the business leaders out there watching this, listening to this, reach out to our experts. We'll put links to their contact information, hit them up on LinkedIn, use them as resources because it can be the difference between your company having an attack and not having an attack. Recovering quickly versus being down for a long time, not having the right software in place versus having the right software in place. It's really important. And our leaders today have really highlighted the importance of this as not just an IT strategy, but as we said, this is a business strategy moving forward. I want to thank the audience for joining us as well. I hope that you have found the discussion as important as I have. A lot of actionable takeaways here for us to sift through. Thank you all again. Until our next roundtable where we discuss these issues and provide more updates, everybody stay vigilant, keep the culture high in your company, keep training, stay informed, and keep innovating. Thank you all so much.